All right, everyone, so we're going to get started. So hi there, my name's Rose. I'm a fourth year nursing student.
And I'm Caeleb. I'm a fifth year psych student.
And so we're here on behalf of the Mental Health Awareness Committee. We are your two community outreach volunteers, and we're here to run presentations about mental health awareness to help stomp the stigma, which is our little catchphrase. So a little bit about MHAC before we get started. MHAC stands for the Mental Health Awareness Committee. We were founded 20 years ago, and our role on campus is to help reduce the stigma surrounding mental health. We fall under the Social Issues Commission of the AMS, so we are entirely student-run. So then a little bit about the presentation. We divided it up into 5 main sections. So the first part is what is mental health and mental illness. Second, we're just going to be discussing stigma. Third will be how to reach out to a friend. Next is how to help a friend. And then lastly, we have a couple discussion questions that we'd like to run. A little bit about the presentation. You can feel free to ask questions at any time. We will be discussing some more intense topics such as suicide and mental illness. So if you have any questions at the end that you don't feel comfortable asking about in front of the whole group, we'll stick around at the end if you have any questions that you want to address a little bit more quietly, or if you have any questions about anything that we said, or just want to chat. We're super keen about mental health, so.
Yeah. And we are filming the presentation today, but we're not filming any of you guys, and the camera will be turned off for discussion and that sort of thing, so you're going to still remain anonymous during the presentation, just in case you were worried. Alrighty. So before we get started, I wanted to introduce this idea to you of an accountable space. You might have heard of a safe space before. It's kind of a similar idea, but essentially what an accountable space refers to is a space where people are treated with respect, care, and openness and curiosity to learn from one another. So we all recognize that each of us has our own experiences and opinions that we're coming into a conversation with, but it's also important to recognize that each of us has these opinions and that we need to recognize that other people may be affected by what we're saying or how we're presenting our ideas, and that we're willing to discuss openly about those ideas. Does that make sense? I like nice nods during presentation. Nice nods, that's good. Great. Okay. So while we get started on our presentation, I'm going to talk a bit about what mental health is and, of course, what mental illness is. So in order to define mental health, we like to use the World Health Organization's definition. So mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her own community. And so we can see how this is divided up into kind of 3 different subsections. So the first one is overcoming external stressors, which is represented by the picture of the people jumping over hurdles. So we all have these hurdles that come up in our lives, these external stressors, and based on whether we're experiencing optimal or poor mental health, our ability to overcome these hurdles can be affected. And the second part of mental health is the level of personal fulfillment. So this is pretty self-explanatory, but just the amount that you feel fulfilled in your life and your experiences. And again, this is affected by your level of mental health. So if you're experiencing poor mental health, you may not be feeling as fulfilled in your life as a whole. And the third and final portion of our definition of mental health is the ability to have positive social relationships and connections. So when someone is experiencing poor mental health, they may withdraw from a lot of social connections and may not be able to act as socially as they once did.
So we want to introduce this idea of a health spectrum because all sorts of health fall on the spectrum. And so we have a little bit of an activity. So everyone could stick up their arm, doesn't matter if it's right or left, and you can change halfway through the activity. But pretty much I'm just going to be going over a bunch of different scenarios and place yourself on the spectrum. So for optimal health, you're feeling like superb, and then for poor health, you're not feeling all that great.
So essentially what you're doing is you're lifting up your arm and you lean kind of to one side to indicate optimal or poor health, essentially.
All right.
So your arms need to be up. Yeah, there we go.
So
making this clear.
So So for the first one, you have a head cold. So where would you place yourself on the spectrum? And then now you have the stomach flu. And then you haven't been great, so you went to the doctor and they diagnosed you with pneumonia. And then you started experiencing a lot of abdominal pain and you went to the emergency room and they told you that you have appendicitis. And so now you're feeling really happy and you're doing really well. And now you're feeling a bit stressed, but you're able to get through each day. And then you feel down, you find it hard to get out of bed in the morning, and you're feeling very anxious.
Okay. So you can put your arms in now. Essentially, the point of the activity is to draw the connection between mental health and physical health. And like physical health, you're always going to be on this kind of spectrum. And every day you're going to move somewhere on the spectrum, and each of us in this room is somewhere within this vicinity. So maybe one day you could be experiencing very optimal mental health and be on one end of the spectrum, and then another day, or even the same day, you could move and be experiencing more poor mental health. Maybe next one. And within this spectrum, there's also going to be a division of self-care and professional care and its place on this spectrum. So for optimal mental health, we can see how self-care can take a bigger portion of the pie. It's more important to engage in self-care maybe when you're experiencing optimal mental health, and professional care may not be as needed. However, we can still see that even if you are experiencing optimal mental health, there still is a place for professional care. Just like with physical health, even if you're feeling very well and healthy, you can still go to the doctor and get a checkup. And that's the exact same for mental health. And then if we're on the other side of the spectrum with poor mental health, we can see how self-care still takes up a large portion of this, but professional care becomes more important. You may need a bit more extra help, and then you would seek professional care. Just like if you were physically ill and doing really poorly, maybe have appendicitis, you're not going to kind of sit at home and hope it goes away. You're going to go see a doctor. And the exact same with mental health. And then it gets a little bit more complicated. So we have a spectrum that we talked about before, which is going from strong mental health to poor mental health. And then we also have the addition of serious mental illness or no mental illness. And we can add quadrants to this, where you can experience strong mental health with mental illness. You can also experience poor mental health with mental illness, and strong mental health without mental illness, and poor mental health without mental illness. And what I like to do here is draw the connection to physical health and physical illnesses. So let's say if you have diabetes. With diabetes, you're far more likely, let's say, to be experiencing poor health because it's a difficult illness to manage. However, if you're taking insulin properly, checking in with a doctor, eating healthy, those sorts of things, then you're able to be in the strong health quadrant of things while still experiencing this illness. And it's the same with a lot of mental illnesses. So let's say if you have depression, you might be far more likely to kind of fall into the poor mental health section of things. However, if you're taking care of yourself, engaging in self-care and professional care as you see fit, you can be in the strong mental health quadrant. And you also don't need a mental illness diagnosis to move throughout these quadrants. You can experience poor or strong mental health differentiating on a day-to-day basis. So essentially, what's important to remember about what we just talked about is mental illness is an important part of mental health. Just like physical health and physical illness are kind of connected and on a spectrum, mental health works in much the same way. And also someone with very poor mental health doesn't necessarily need to have a mental illness, and vice versa. So we're all different, we have very different experiences, and we'll move throughout the spectrum of mental health.
So we spoke a lot about where mental illness falls on the spectrum, but we wanted to address actually what mental illness is. So when someone has a mental illness, we'll see changes in their thinking, mood, and behavior, and it's often associated with significant distress and impaired functioning. And it has a diagnosable pattern. It depends where you are, which diagnostic material they use, but the most common one that you hear of is the DSM-5, and so that just has a certain set of criteria that someone needs to meet in order to have a diagnosis, and mental illnesses are very treatable. And so when we talk about thinking, mood, and behavior, here are a couple really common examples. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but in thinking, people might have changes in memory, so they might have trouble remembering things, thinking just in terms of how quickly they're able to think, and then concentration there. Changes in mood, you might see loss of pleasure, decreased hope, feelings of sadness, and then with behavior, you might find that someone has restlessness, trouble sleeping, or decreased self-care behaviors. And so you can see how something like this would be incredibly distressing. And so the best thing that you can do if you have a friend who's experiencing a mental illness or poor mental health is to give them hope. So as I mentioned before, in mood, they might have decreased hope. So give them hope by showing them that you care. And so 5 things to know about mental illness. 1, they're more common than people think. 1 in 5 people will experience a mental illness over their lifetime. This is more common in university students. It's 1 in 4. And even more common in seniors populations. It's 1 in 3. They're more disabling than people think. They're associated with violence a lot less than people think. Someone with a mental illness is actually more likely to be a victim of violence than someone who causes violence. They're much more treatable than people think. And mental illness is an extension of normal human behavior. So as we saw before on the spectrum.
Alrighty. So next I'm going to talk about stigma. And essentially, although stigma is a phenomenon which affects a lot more than just mental health, it's particularly important to this discussion that we're having today. So how stigma works is it's just any negative attitude, belief, or stereotype that pose an added challenge to the open discussion of mental health and often pressure those who are struggling to retract and avoid seeking help. So stigma is an act of social oppression. Stigma is a systemic issue that is pervasive across many institutions, such as in universities, in healthcare, and in government.
So you're wondering, where does stigma come from? And so there's the cognitive side of it, which is negative stereotypes. That's just what you might think when you see someone with a mental illness or someone acting in a particular way because of their mental health. Secondly is the emotional side of it. So that's the personal prejudice that you might be feeling. Next is the behavioral aspect of it, so social distancing for people with poor mental health or mental illness. They just feel like they're not supported. And then the last part is the structural part of stigma, which is a social disadvantage, which is unfortunately a reality, but by helping decrease stigma, we can help people with poor mental health and with mental illnesses have the same social advantages as someone with really good mental health. And so when we talk about social stigma, there's a huge part of it is what we say in our language. And so these are things you may or may not have heard. A couple really common ones are just like, get over it, or you are so OCD. But you can see how things like that being said, maybe not necessarily even directly to the person if it's seen over any form of social media or it's seen on TV or anything like that. You can just see how these are very negative things that are said. And so the person will then internalize those things, and this is what self-stigma is. So this is then when someone feels like they can't reach out for help for fear of judgment because they start to believe that all of those negative things that are said are true about them, which they are not.
Hi there. I'm sorry to disappoint you if you were expecting a lunatic with a knife on some sort of rampage. My name is Stuart and I was diagnosed with schizophrenia 12 years ago. People like me with a diagnosis of mental illness face stigma and discrimination every day. Luckily for me, I had the support from friends and family who helped me lead a full life.
So that's just a really cool, short video about the stigma associated with mental illness. Give me 1 second. Oh, here we go. This one. There we go. Okay. And so the next part about stigma, this is actually one of my favorite quotes, and I say it every time, so we finally added it into the PowerPoint. But it's telling someone that they can't be sad because others have it worse. It's like telling someone that they can't be happy because others have it better, which I think is a really great way of summing up stigma surrounding mental health and mental illness, because everyone faces their own challenges. Just because my life isn't a certain way doesn't mean that I can't have poor mental health. And so it's just a really great way of saying and helping decrease stigma.
Okay. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to try and help reduce stigma, or to become a stigma buster, if you will. And the first thing is increasing your own knowledge. So by coming to presentations like these, just being aware of the facts and also other people's experiences with mental health is a great way to reduce stigma. Another part of it is listening to understand. So demonstrate that you're willing and that you're going to talk about mental health, maybe talking about your own experiences if you're comfortable, or just being there for friends and being willing to listen to their own experiences. Remember, we all have mental health just like we have physical health, so it's an important issue to be open about. And another part of this is challenging what you hear and read in a respectful way. So often in the media, we'll see maybe some disturbing images of individuals with mental health issues, and we can challenge this and ask why this is a portrayal that's happening, and maybe if this is something that shouldn't be portrayed in such a negative way. And another thing too that you can do is challenge what you hear around you. So we talked about this accountable space idea. And if someone within this space were to say something that maybe we found offensive in a way, we can address that. We don't have to let it slide, but we have to do this in a respectful way and also respecting the other person's opinion. So let's say, for example, somebody says, "Oh, I feel so OCD today." That's maybe a little offensive, maybe kind of bugs you a little bit. You don't have to jump down that person's throat or accuse them or anything like that. You can just simply ask, "Well, what do you mean by that?" and talk to them about it and have a conversation. And that's a way to not only reduce their stigma, but also to build a relationship and help them learn about maybe why they shouldn't say those kind of things. Or maybe they had a good reason for saying it. Who knows?
And it can feel a little awkward to have those conversations as well. So a really great way to do it is say, or if you wanted to be like, "Please don't say that," instead of being like, "Don't say that, you are the reason that all these things exist," you could just say, "That makes me feel really uncomfortable," because that way it makes it more personal and it's easy to then have a discussion.
Okay. Another part of stigma and a way to kind of tackle it is using inclusive language. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. And the first thing is to use respectful language. So when you're talking about mental health and mental health issues, remember that these are things that people experience on a day-to-day basis, and so you want to address these issues with the respect that they deserve. And another thing too is to use person-first language. So as we saw in the video earlier, that someone was described as schizo or a schizophrenic. That's not really the best way that we could describe someone who's living with schizophrenia. You can say it like that. They're living with schizophrenia. And that makes the distinction between someone being defined by their mental illness rather than just being a person who happens to have an illness. And the next part is to use strength-based language. A lot of people who are dealing with mental health issues are really struggling, and they work hard every day, maybe just to get out of bed or do small things that we take for granted that we're able to do. And so focusing on strength-based language. So looking at the little things that they're able to do that they're working so hard on and recognizing that and saying that you recognize their achievement, and maybe that you're proud of them for taking that step out the door today, or for taking a shower, or for eating healthy that day. And that's a really important thing that you can do to recognize the struggle that they're going through. And another part of that is using empowering language. And a lot of this has to do with empowering the individual to get help. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you're forcing them to get help, that you're making them go to a doctor or do what you think is right, but you're empowering them to see that as an option, as something that takes a lot of courage to do, and that is ultimately a good action to take and a brave action to take.
And so here's a very scary statistic to look at, but 2 in 3 people suffer in silence for fear of rejection, and this is from the Mental Health Commission of Canada. So then our next part is about how to reach out.
All right, so even when we're looking through our self-care strategies and trying to take care of ourselves the best that we can, sometimes we can all benefit from external support. And so there's a couple of first steps that you can take to try and access help if you're experiencing some mental health issues. And again, you don't necessarily have to have a mental illness or be on the ultimate core end of the spectrum of mental health. It's just based on what your normal is, and maybe when you're outside of that to see if you could get some help. So the first step would be trying to talk about your experiences with an understanding and supportive friend. So seeking them out and talking to them about what you're experiencing. And you could also go to the Peer Support Center here on campus for a free session. So that's in the basement of the JDAC in room 34. And then you could also reach out to a supervisor or leaders in a student group or anything that you're involved with on campus. They're ultimately there to support you and want to help you, and they will be far more understanding than I think most people expect. And another thing you could do is contact Student Wellness here on campus, and they have free counseling sessions that you can book, and they also have a really wonderful mental health nurse.
So then next is the importance of self-care. So self-care can include anything. It's whatever makes you happy and makes you feel better. Anything that can help you just relax. For me, it's going for runs, but it's different for everyone. And so mental health is something that needs your attention, just like your physical health. So just like you eat healthy most days, you try and get outside and walk most days. Mental health, it's really important that you have positive habits, such as actually having a balanced diet, physical activity, and getting enough sleep. And be kind to yourself. Take time to do the things that make you happy and know your personal limits. It can be exhausting, and Queens definitely perpetuates a culture where everyone is always striving to be the best and involved in the most things with the highest GPA. But take care of yourself, and sometimes it's nice to just step back and have a night in by yourself with like Netflix and a bath and a bunch of candles and just to relax.
Alrighty, so for the next portion of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about stress management and mindfulness. So there's a lot of different ways that you can manage your own stress, such as those self-care activities that we just talked about, but one of these ways is mindfulness. So mindfulness is essentially just paying attention to the present moment with impartial awareness and just letting your thoughts kind of flow. So I'm going to run a quick mindfulness activity with you all today. And this is based on mindfulness meditation, which you can learn more about, but if you happen to like this activity. So what I'm going to get everyone to do is find a comfortable position in your chairs. So maybe feet on the floor, you can put your head on the table, whatever you like. And then I'm going to get you to close your eyes. Okay. And so what you're going to do is you're going to imagine that you're standing right in front of a stream. And in the stream, there's all of these leaves and rocks and different things that keep flowing onward. And you can kind of think of this as your stream of consciousness. And so the way this works is that instead of focusing on only one thing, like that one leaf that's in the stream, you're going to let it go and you're going to let it continue down that stream. It's not about focusing on an individual thought that you're going to be having, and ultimately there's going to be tons of things that are flowing into your head, maybe what you want to eat next, or that assignment you have due, or the fact that your sweater's too tight or something. But you're going to let those thoughts go and focus instead on your breathing. So you're going to breathe in and out, and you can kind of count your breaths as 1 and 2, but you're just going to focus on the breath and let those thoughts kind of continue down that stream of consciousness. So we're going to take a few minutes, and you can just kind of keep focusing on your breath. Don't be judgmental of the thoughts that keep popping in your head, just kind of let them flow. Okay, so I'm going to bring you back out of the exercise. And so that's a form of mindfulness meditation using a visualization technique. So that's what the stream and all that stuff was about. And that's something that you can really do anytime, taking a minute between classes, just taking a break during your day, different things like that. And if you want to learn more, there's tons of stuff online. There's different mindfulness tracks that you can use with like ocean sounds and all that kind of stuff. So just taking a little break and that sort of thing and using mindfulness. So next we're going to talk about how you could help a friend and when it might be a good idea to reach out and talk to a friend. So often when we talk about mental health and mental illness, we talk about this idea of what is normal. And normal doesn't exist, quite frankly, but for each person, they have their own version of normal. So for Rose is really put together. She's always happy and smiling and comes to meetings on time and keeps me on track. And if I started noticing things that were out of Rose's normal, then that's something that I would want to pay attention to, because that's a change in behavior that could be a sign of maybe a larger issue. And so when we notice these changes in behavior in those closest to us, it's a good idea to maybe check in with those friends. And if we're talking about children, often mental health issues can manifest in ways that we really don't expect, such as maybe lashing out in anger or shyness or different things like that. And so it's important just to, again, figure out what is that individual's normal and see maybe if their behavior is lying outside of that recently. So the next part is how you would help that friend, how you would have a conversation with them. And what I like to use is a really great acronym from the Peer Support Center, which is TALKS. So I'm going to put them all up there. So the first thing is telling them that you care. When you start this conversation with a friend, when you're trying to check in with them and talk to them about something, you want to make sure that you're letting them know that you're coming from a place of care. Everything that you're saying in this conversation is ultimately because you care about that person. You're not trying to blame them for the changes in behavior or let them know that they're frustrating you. You're there because you care about them. And next, you want to ask gently about what's going on with them. And so it wouldn't be in a kind of blaming sort of way, like, Rose, why aren't we at our meeting? You suck. That's not really a good way to talk to anybody. But maybe asking, hey, I've noticed that you weren't at our meeting before. Is there something going on? And then you want to listen empathetically. And this is by far the most important thing. You want to try and be as impartial as you can and just be there for your friend, whatever way you can do that. The next is knowing your resources, and this is so you can maybe make some referrals for your friends. And we're going to talk about resources at the end of the presentation, so if you don't already have a whole bunch in your back pocket, you will. And then you want to stay in touch. So after you've had this conversation with a friend, you want to make sure that you check in with them again. Maybe shoot them a text, send them a weird emoji, that kind of thing, whatever you want to do, but just letting them know that you're still there and you're still open to having further conversations about this issue. And it's also important to remember that we're all equals and we all face our own challenges. Again, every day we're going to be on a different place on that mental health spectrum. And so if we all support each other, then we're going to work towards better mental health together. Okay, so again, on asking gently, the most important thing to remember is that if you're asking someone about what's going on with them, you're never going to make it worse. By asking someone about their mental health, it's not going to make them automatically have poor mental health. Just as if you ask someone if they were thinking about suicide, it's not going to make them think more about suicide or anything like that. So you shouldn't be afraid that you'll make it worse by asking them. You also don't want to assume diagnosis. There's this fun thing called second-year psych student syndrome, in which you diagnose everyone for everything. And that's not very good because you're not a doctor. You can't actually diagnose people, and it's just kind of a strange thing to do. So don't assume diagnosis. The diagnosis isn't actually important. What's important is being supportive and being there for your friends. And another part of that is saying what you see. So if I was talking to Rose, again, my example for this part of the presentation, I want to tell her what I've been seeing. I don't want to try and blame her or say, oh, you're depressed or that sort of thing. It's saying, I've noticed that you're not at meetings, or, you seem kind of down. Is everything okay? Is there anything that I can do? And the next part is be patient. Mental health issues can be really pervasive and last for a long time. And so just being patient with the individual and remaining there for them. And also trust yourself. Often you think that you're saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, but if you're doing the best you can, then that's going to be enough. And this is just an example of a way that you could phrase this asking gently. So I've noticed this or this. Are you okay? How can I help?
And just to add on to that, a huge part of when you ask someone, oh, how are you doing? It's such a common response to say, good. And then they go, how are you? You say, oh, I'm good. And then you just sort of run away before you could even talk about anything. So if you say those specific behaviors, it definitely will bring up more of a conversation than just going, oh, how are you doing? It's easier. It's easier to go down that simple route, but to just say exactly what you're seeing is really good. So then the art of active listening. So this comes into the listen empathetically part of the TALKS acronym. And so the person that you are talking to wants to feel supported and understood. So the best way to do this is to reflect the tone and body language of the individual. Confirm that you are there and that you're listening to what they're saying. And rephrase things that you don't understand to help them organize their own thoughts. I've felt this way before, where you just feel like you have a million things on your mind at the same time. And so to sort of tell it to someone all at once, and then they repeat it back to you in just the simplest way, can help you really organize your thoughts. So by helping someone organize their own thoughts, a good way of saying this is, so what I'm hearing is. And the next part is treat disclosure as an act of courage. So if you say, I've noticed this, are you okay? And they say, no, I'm not, I'm feeling this way. Say, thank you for telling me, because it's huge. It's one of the most vulnerable things that you can do is telling someone else about your own poor mental health. And so by thanking them, you're showing them that you really care and that you really appreciate that they started that conversation with you. So then in terms of next steps, so you've had this conversation, and you've thanked them for telling you, focus on what the individual wants to do. It can be really easy if someone says, oh, I'm feeling this way, to say, oh, let's go get you counseling. And counseling is a really great option for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone. So making sure that you are helping support them in their struggles. For children, it's really good to reach out to parents and caregivers and teachers. You might find this with your friends as well, that you just want to reach out to their parents and let them know what's going on. And ask if they have other support systems in place. It can be, unfortunately, exhausting to be someone's sole support system. I mean, it's better that you're there versus no one, but asking if they have other people that they can talk to. And then also following up. So like Caeleb mentioned, after you have these conversations, don't just let that sort of slide. Go back maybe a week later and say, how are you feeling now? And do it in a quiet place. Don't do it like as you're rushing opposite ways down university, being like, how are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm fine. And you're like, okay, good, me too, bye. Like, sit down and have in a quiet spot, or you can go to like the tea room or co-grow, but in a place where you have a chance to have a really good and long and open discussion. And then the last part is self-care. As I mentioned before, it can be exhausting to be someone's sole support system. So make sure that you take care of yourself. And a huge part of that is making sure that you know that you are not responsible for what the individual does. So if you're talking to someone and they disclose their poor mental health to you and then something adverse happens, it's not your fault. You did everything right by starting the conversation with them, and you definitely helped them out a lot. But it's not your fault. Don't feel like you said or did the wrong thing ever because, Just cause. And so next, we touched on this a little bit before, how to talk to children about mental health, just because they don't understand it the same way as us and our peers do. But basically, if you explain it like it's physical health, the example that we used before, it's really helpful with kids. And use an illness that they've already had. Like every kid has had a head cold. So just saying, sometimes you have a cold and you don't feel good, and sometimes you feel really bad because your brain is sick. So it's just a very simple way of putting it for kids. In terms of promoting self-care behaviors, just ask the kid what they like to do, and try to get to promote that activity. So if they really like soccer, maybe make sure that they make it to their soccer game, or just maybe pick up a ball and play soccer with them. And then the last part is mental health of others. If one of their parents is experiencing poor mental health or anything like that, you just explain it the same way as you would for their own mental health. So comparing it to physical illness.
Okay. So next I'm going to talk about suicide and situations of crisis. So the most important thing to remember is that you're not going to be responsible for this person's well-being. You're never primarily responsible for another person, but you're just doing whatever you can to try and support them in a difficult time. So there's a lot of different things that you can do when you believe that someone may harm themselves or others. And the most important thing is you want to be supportive and non-judgmental. It's very similar when we were talking about the TALKS acronym, where you want to come from a place of care. That if this individual has disclosed to you that they are dealing with thoughts of suicidal ideation, it's really important to acknowledge that them coming out and saying that to you, again, is an act of courage, and to be supportive and non-judgmental. You want to stay with that individual and ask if it would be okay to have another supportive friend join you. I like to think of having a mental health support team. You don't want to be a team of one. You're not going to win any games that way, right? So if you have a larger support team, then it's more likely that the individual will get the help that they need and have the support that they need, and that you're going to be able to engage in self-care activities. And again, you want to make sure that the individual knows that by asking to have another person join you, it's not that you're trying to kind of shout off the rooftops that they're having these feelings, but it's just that you care about them and you want to help them in any way that you can, and having another person there would be helpful to you. You also want to provide information about the resources available, and then help them access these resources if they wish, and maybe accompany them to getting these resources. And in these situations, don't hesitate to contact emergency services. You can always contact 911, or there's the Queen's Emergency Report Center, which is just Queen's Security, and they have a lot of training for dealing with these types of issues. And their number is just up there, and you can always access it in the Queen's directory.